She stood barefoot on the saloon stage, wearing nothing but a torn white dress and a look of quiet terror. Men shouted numbers like they were bidding on livestock, not a living, breathing girl with tears in her eyes and dignity slipping through her fingers. 18, orphaned, alone. They called her the most beautiful virgin in Red Rock, like it was a title to be bought. And tonight, someone would. Brady Finch raised the gavel with a smile that could rot wood. "Gentlemen," he sneered, "she's debt-bound, fresh, and ready. Let's start at $50. The girl swallowed hard. No one was coming. No one ever did. Until the back door creaked open, and a dusty farmer broke, tired, and nobody stepped inside. He didn't come to buy a girl, but he was about to spend every dollar he had for a reason that would change all their lives. Her name was Eliza Harlow, 18 years old, born in the dust and silence of forgotten land, and nearly forgotten herself. She'd never known her mother. Her father was a drunk with a broken hand and a heavier soul, who gambled everything on men with faster cards and sharper knives. When he died in a saloon brawl last spring, Eliza was left with nothing, except his debts. And in a town like Red Rock, debts didn't die when the debtor did. They passed to the next of kin, even if that kin was just a girl, barely grown, with no one to protect her. Brady Finch, the man who claimed the debt, ran the saloon. He owned half the town and all of its shadows. He said her father owed $70, but somehow that number kept growing. Eliza tried. She worked the saloon kitchen. She mended clothes. She scrubbed floorboards with torn fingers and bloodied knees. It wasn't enough. 3 days ago, Finch leaned in close, his breath stinking of whiskey and smoke, and whispered, "Debt's due, girl. You can pay it with your body, or with the auction block." She begged. He smiled. He scheduled the sale for Saturday. When the town heard what was happening, no one spoke up. Not the storekeepers, not the preacher, not the banker who once held her father's IOUs. Some shook their heads and muttered, "Shame." But no one stopped it, because in Red Rock, shame never outranked money. And Finch had plenty of that. So now Eliza stood in the center of the saloon. The broken spur, they called it. The very place where her father had lost everything, where she would lose the last thing she had left herself. She wore the white dress Finch made her wear. It clung to her like paper in the rain, soaked in sweat and fear. Her arms trembled at her sides, too numb to cover herself. Eyes watched her from every corner. Men miners, drifters, ranch hands leaning forward on bar stools and tables, grinning, whispering, licking their lips. She'd never hated a sound more than she hated their laughter. Finch climbed the little auction stage beside her and raised his hand. "Ah, gentlemen," he said, his voice slick and smug. "What we have here is Eliza Harlow, virgin, clean, quiet, owes her late father's debts, and I aim to collect. We'll start the bidding at $50. No one said anything at first. Then a man near the bar shouted, "50? Someone else laughed. "60? A third voice yelled, "75? The crowd began to warm up. Eliza felt her knees wobble. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. But she remembered what Finch had whispered in her ear that morning. "Run and I'll send the dogs. Scream and I'll gag you. Either way, you're mine till the gavel falls." And that was when the saloon doors creaked open. Not slammed, not kicked, just creaked. Slow and quiet, a figure stepped into the doorway, coated in trail dust and silence. His name was Daniel Rusk, a poor farmer from 2 valleys east. The kind of man no one noticed unless they needed eggs or hay. He wasn't tall, he wasn't broad. But there was something about him, the way he stood, the way his eyes swept the room that made the laughter fade. He wasn't looking to buy anything. He'd come to Red Rock to buy medicine. His daughter, Sophie, was 7 years old, and she'd broken her leg chasing chickens down a rocky hill. Daniel had been saving for weeks to buy what she needed. He had $90 to his name. No rifle, no pistol, just a sack of cornmeal, a half-empty canteen, and a heart that refused to grow hard. And now, that heart was about to be tested in a way he never imagined. He looked at the stage, at the girl. She didn't cry anymore. She just stared into the crowd like she'd already left her own body. Daniel clenched his jaw. He didn't know her. Didn't know her name, her story, her sins, or her virtues. But he knew what he was looking at. He knew evil when he saw it parading in daylight, wearing a crowd. He looked down at the crumpled bills in his coat pocket. He thought of his daughter, lying in bed, waiting for him. And then, he took a breath. The kind of breath you only take once in a life. And he stepped forward. Daniel Rusk didn't speak at first. He stepped forward slowly, boot heels scraping against warped saloon floorboards, eyes never leaving the girl on the stage. The crowd noticed him now. A few smirked. One man whispered, "That's Rusk, dirt farmer from Willow Creek." Another chuckled, "Ain't got 2 pennies to rub together. What's he doing here?" But Daniel didn't flinch. His coat was worn. His hands were rough. He smelled like soil, saddle leather, and stubborn hope. Finch narrowed his eyes, gavel still raised midair. "Well now," he drawled, "didn't expect a turnip picker at my auction. Something you need, farmer?" Daniel looked up at Eliza. She met his eyes for the first time. Something flickered in her expression, confusion maybe, or disbelief. Because the way he looked at her, it wasn't like the others. Not hunger, not pity, just recognition. The kind you feel when you see a caged bird and remember how it used to sing. Daniel cleared his throat. "How much?" The room felt quiet. Finch raised an eyebrow. "We're at 75. Do I hear 80? Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a small roll of bills. Thin, trembling, all he had. 90. Someone laughed. "He's broke now." Finch leaned forward, amused. "You sure about that, farmer? Got anything left for feed? Firewood? Your little girl?" Daniel nodded once. 90. Eliza stared at him like she was dreaming, because no man had ever spoken for her like that. Not without wanting something in return. Finch tapped the gavel. Going once, going twice, and then a voice rang out from the back of the saloon. 100! Heads turned. Clay Rimmer had entered the room. Big, brash, and bull mean. He was the kind of man who chewed tobacco like he chewed people slow, mean, and with blood in his teeth. "I've been waiting on this girl," he growled. "Wasn't planning on bidding till the end, but now that dirt boy's involved." He flashed a grin that made Eliza's stomach twist. "Let's make it fun." Finch smirked. "We've got 100 from Mr. Rimmer. Do I hear 110? Daniel didn't move. His heart pounded. 90 was all he had. Every dollar meant warmth, medicine, safety for Sophie. He could walk away now. No one would blame him. But then he looked at Eliza again. Saw the way her breath hitched, the way her hands clenched at her sides like she was trying to disappear. And suddenly his daughter's voice echoed in his memory. "Papa, why do we help people?" He took a deep breath, and he said, 150. The saloon exploded. Someone dropped a glass. Another whistled long and low. Even Finch looked stunned. 150 from the farmer? Well, damn. Never thought I'd see charity in this town. Clay Rimmer stood, nostrils flaring. "No. You trying to insult me, Rusk?" Daniel didn't answer. Finch raised the gavel. "Going once, going twice," Clay snarled. 200 gasps. The entire saloon held its breath. Eliza closed her eyes. She knew what 200 meant. That was the number no one was supposed to beat. The price that sealed her fate. And Daniel said nothing. Finch grinned wide. "Well now, seems like it's over. Unless Farmer here's got a miracle under that coat." Silence stretched. Daniel looked down at the last bill in his hand. A 10. Meaningless now. Still he held it, tight, like he was holding a piece of his soul. He turned to Eliza. "I'm sorry." But as he stepped back, Eliza did something no one expected. She reached out just slightly toward him, like she didn't want him to go. Like for 1 second, she believed he was different. The air inside the broken spur was thick with heat, liquor, and something colder. The silence after Daniel's step back wasn't relief. It was disappointment. Eliza had nearly reached for him, nearly begged a stranger not to leave. But now, her hand fell to her side like a dropped flower. And Clay Rimmer grinned like a wolf watching a rabbit realize there's no way out. Finch chuckled, lifting the gavel higher. "Well, folks, we got 200 from Clay Rimmer. Seems the lady's going home with a real man tonight." Daniel turned, ready to walk. His boots scraped once across the floor. And then he stopped, dead still, because something inside him, a memory, a prayer, a voice he'd ignored for years, spoke louder than the auctioneer. He turned back, looking past the stage, past the crowd, and straight at Eliza. She wasn't crying anymore, wasn't flinching. She just stared at him, waiting. And that's when Daniel Rusk made the second most reckless decision of his life. The first had been marrying Sarah when he was 19. The second was what he said next. 210, Daniel said. The crowd gasped. Finch choked on his own spit. Even Clay Rimmer froze. "You what?" Finch barked. Daniel reached into his boot and pulled out an envelope. The emergency money. The kind you bury in case of famine. The kind you forget you have until your child's coughing blood. He handed it to Finch. Cash, added up. Finch unsealed it, grinning like a crow tearing into a carcass. 10, 10, 5, 1, 210, exactly. Daniel locked eyes with Clay. "Oh, I don't want trouble, Rimmer. I just want to take her and go." Clay snorted. "You think this is about money, farmer? This is about respect, about knowing your place." Daniel's voice stayed calm. "My place is wherever I say it is." Finch raised the gavel slowly. And for the first time that night, he hesitated. He looked between them, Daniel firm and poor, and Clay rich and furious. Two kinds of men, two kinds of outcomes, but only one of them was about to make him more money. "Sold," Finch said, grinning. The gavel cracked the wood. 210 to the gentleman farmer. Eliza didn't move. Her eyes widened, but her body froze unsure, trembling. Daniel stepped forward and held out a hand. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently. "I didn't buy you. I bought your freedom." She didn't speak, didn't trust it. But after a long pause, she climbed down the steps. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the girl reached Daniel's side. Still barefoot, still shaking, still not sure what had just happened. Clay Rimmer rose from his chair, slow and menacing. "You'll regret this," he said. Daniel didn't blink. "I already regret plenty. One more won't kill me." He placed a protective hand on Eliza's shoulder. "Let's go." They walked to the saloon doors together. Each step felt like crossing a minefield. Behind them, Finch muttered under his breath. Clay's eyes burned with fire, but no one moved. No one dared. Outside, the wind was cooler. The sky, blood orange with dying light. Daniel helped Eliza into his wagon, careful not to startle her. She flinched anyway. Her nerves were frayed raw. "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said as he took the reins. "I didn't do this to own you. I did it because it was right." She stared at him, still unsure, still silent. But in her lap, her fingers slowly curled, gripping the edge of the bench like it might carry her somewhere safe. Back inside the saloon, Clay Rimmer turned to Finch. "You let that girl go." Finch shrugged. "She sold. You could have outbid him." Clay leaned in close. "You didn't tell him about our arrangement." Finch blinked. "What arrangement?" The one where I paid you 50 last week for first rights. Finch paled. The crowd was still watching, some leaning closer, sensing blood. You didn't tell him I already claimed her, Clay growled, voice rising. Finch tried to hush him. Now, Clay, calm down. No, you listen. He's not walking out clean. I got claim. And suddenly, the room snapped back to tension. Like a gun hammer pulled too far. Men shifted. Hands went to belts. The whiskey haze sharpened into dread. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. The wheels of Daniel's wagon creaked across the dry dirt as the last light faded from the sky. Eliza sat beside him, silent, stiff. Every now and then her eyes would flick sideways to him, to the reins in his hands, to the road ahead. But she didn't speak, didn't trust it. Not yet. Daniel glanced over. You don't have to talk, he said gently, keeping his eyes on the road. But if there's anything you need, anything you want to ask. She shook her head. Once. Then softly, why? He didn't answer right away. He let the horses clop a few more steps before he said, because someone should have done it a long time ago. They rode in silence another mile. Dust swirled around them. The scent of cedar and burnt tobacco still clung to her skin. Then she asked even softer, Are you going to keep me? Daniel turned, surprised. No, ma'am, he said. I'm going to feed you and give you a bed, that's all. Her lips parted, confused. No man does that. Not for free. Daniel gave a faint smile. My wife would have smacked me if I hadn't. That was when Eliza looked at him fully. Really looked. He wasn't handsome. Wasn't charming. But he had kind eyes. And he hadn't touched her. Not once. They were 2 miles out of Red Rock when the sound came. Thump. Snap. The horses reared, panicked. Daniel yanked the reins. Easy. Whoa, whoa, girl. A figure stepped into the road. Another behind him. And another. And another. Clay Rimmer stood front and center. Dust on his boots. Blood in his smile. Going somewhere, farmer. Daniel stood in the wagon bed, shielding Eliza. Get out of the road. Clay laughed. You didn't pay full price. That girl's not yours. I didn't buy her, Daniel said. I freed her. Well, I had an arrangement with Finch. Paid him 50 for first rights. That wasn't in the auction. Still counts, Clay snapped. She's mine. From the shadows behind him, 3 more men stepped forward. Rimmer's ranch hands, all armed. You planning to fight us, Rusk? Clay sneered. You even got a gun? Daniel didn't answer. He stepped down, slowly, calmly. One boot, then the other. Eliza whispered, Don't, please, just leave me. But Daniel walked forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just steady. You want to kill a man over a girl who never wanted you? He asked. You do it here, with the whole town watching. Clay scoffed. Ain't nobody watching. And that's when a second sound broke through. The jingle of spurs. Behind them, the saloon doors swung open again. A figure stepped into the twilight. Sheriff Amos Kilroy. Old, tired, and drunk most days, but still wearing the badge. You boys threatening a man who just paid fair and square? The sheriff asked, voice low. Clay cursed under his breath. Stay out of this, Sheriff. I'm not in it, Kilroy shrugged. But the judge's office is. You gun down a man who won a legal sale, you'll be swinging by morning. Clay's jaw worked. His fingers flexed near the butt of his pistol. Then he dropped his hand. Not out of mercy, out of calculation. You just made a real bad enemy, farmer, Clay growled. Daniel nodded. So I've heard. The ranch hands backed off. Clay spit in the dust. This ain't over. And they walked off, disappearing into the dusk. Daniel climbed back into the wagon. His pulse thumped like war drums behind his ribs. He flicked the reins. They rode in silence again. But Eliza was breathing differently now. Still scared, but not alone. Back in town, Finch lit a cigar behind the saloon, hands shaking. He muttered to himself. Then to no one in particular, he whispered, "Let him think he won." Because Finch knew something Daniel didn't. There were debts in Red Rock, and not all of them were paid in dollars. The wagon rolled slow through the high grass, the last hint of daylight clinging to the hills like smoke. Daniel kept his eyes forward, but his hands were tight on the reins. Too tight. Beside him, Eliza watched him, but said nothing. She didn't know how to ask the question. Didn't know if she was allowed. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you really do it?" Daniel exhaled, a long, tired breath. "I've got a daughter," he said quietly. "Sophie. She's 7. Broke her leg last week chasing chickens through the garden like she was racing horses." He gave a small smile. "She's fire and thunder, that one." Eliza looked down at her lap. She didn't know why it hurt to hear that. Maybe because no one had ever spoken about her like that, with warmth, with pride. Daniel continued, "I was headed into town for medicine when I heard the shouting from the saloon. I wasn't supposed to stop. Lord knows I couldn't afford to. But then I saw you." He didn't say what he saw. Didn't need to. Eliza's voice cracked as she asked, "And what if your daughter needed that money?" He was silent a long time. Then he answered, "She does." Eliza turned to him, startled. He nodded. "That was every dollar I had, every damn cent. I was going to buy her bandages, bit of laudanum for the pain." Eliza blinked. "Then why?" "Because I saw you standing on that stage," he said, voice low and even. "And I thought if that were Sophie 10 years from now, and no one stepped up." His voice broke. Just a little. "I couldn't live with that." The wind picked up. Eliza pulled the shawl around her shoulders. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to speak to a man who didn't want anything. So she said the only truth she had. "No one's ever done something like that for me." Daniel didn't reply right away. Then he said, "Maybe it's about time someone did." They rode until the moon was high. The night was quiet. No wolves, no gunfire, no shouting men with fists full of money. Just crickets and the slow, steady breath of two people who had been broken too many times in too many ways. Eventually, a soft glow appeared over the hill, a small cabin, lantern lit in the window. "That's home," Daniel said. He looked tired, but lighter. And when they rolled up to the porch, the door opened, and there she was. A little girl with a wooden splint on her leg, and braids hanging over her shoulders like golden ropes. "Papa!" she cried. Daniel grinned. "Hey there, sweetheart." As Sophie hobbled out, her eyes landed on Eliza. She blinked, tilted her head. "Who's that?" Daniel hesitated, then looked to Eliza. "You can tell her," Eliza said softly. Daniel turned back to Sophie and said, "This is Miss Eliza. She's going to stay a while. She's been through some bad things." Sophie's eyes went wide. Then after a beat, she stepped forward and offered her small hand. "Well, I've been through some things too," she said. "You can sleep in Mama's old room. It still smells like flowers." Eliza looked down at the girl's outstretched fingers. Her voice caught in her throat. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt safe. The next morning came like a promise. Cool air, chickens scratching the yard, Sophie giggling through the window as Eliza taught her how to fold bread dough with one hand. For a moment, Daniel believed it was over. That maybe, just maybe, the world could leave them alone. Then came the knock. Hard, sharp, wrong. Daniel stepped onto the porch, hand near the shotgun leaning by the door. 2 men stood in the yard. Tall, broad. Faces Daniel had seen at the auction near Clay Rimmer. One of them smiled. "Mornin'. You Daniel Rusk?" "I am." "You've got something don't belong to you." Daniel's fingers tightened on the porch rail. "You came to take her?" The second man shook his head. No, sir. We ain't here for her. The first man nodded toward the barn. We got someone wants a word with you. You come alone. Daniel's jaw clenched. Where's my daughter? In the barn, the man said. Alive, for now. Daniel didn't wait. He walked toward the barn with fists clenched, legs heavy, mind racing. The wood creaked beneath his boots. And when he stepped inside, his world stopped. Sophie sat on a hay bale, a rag tied over her mouth, eyes wide and terrified. Behind her stood Clay Rimmer. His pistol was aimed at the floor, but the message was clear. One step too fast, he said coldly, and I find out how loud a child screams. Daniel froze, his mouth dry, his skin cold. What do you want? Clay stepped forward. Simple. You give me the girl, I walk away. Your daughter stays safe. You already lost the auction. Yeah, Clay growled, but you didn't win me. He grinned. See, you embarrassed me, in front of half the town, and now you think you can just ride off into the sunset? Daniel said nothing. His eyes flicked to Sophie, her eyes filled with silent tears. Clay leaned closer. You hand over Eliza. I swear on my daddy's grave, your kid walks away without a scratch. The silence stretched like a tightrope. Daniel's heart pounded. Behind him, Eliza had stepped up to the barn door. She saw everything. Saw the gun, saw the fear, saw the choice. She shook her head. No, she whispered. Don't do it. Don't give me to him. Daniel turned slowly, looked at her, then at his daughter, then at the pistol. This was it. The crossroads. Save the girl, or save his own child. One life for another. Clay smiled wider. Come on, farmer. You got 5 seconds to make the smart choice. Daniel's voice was steady when he spoke. Don't need 5. He stepped forward, putting himself directly in front of the pistol. You want her? You go through me. Clay's eyes narrowed. You're not armed. Daniel looked him dead in the eyes. Don't need to be. A moment passed, then another. Behind Daniel, Eliza grabbed Sophie and pulled her gently behind a post. Clay's finger twitched. He was calculating, measuring the shot, the risk, the cost. Then the barn door creaked again. Footsteps, boots, voices. And suddenly the silence shattered. Step away from the child, Rimmer. Sheriff Kilroy, Judge Briggs, and 3 armed townsmen. Daniel didn't turn. He kept his eyes on Clay. The rancher hesitated. Then he snarled, lowered the gun, and backed away. This ain't over, he spat. It is for today, the sheriff growled. As they hauled Clay out into the sun, Sophie clung to her father. Eliza stood still, shaking. Daniel looked at both of them and exhaled for the first time in hours. They were safe, for now. The sun was high by the time Clay Rimmer was marched through the center of Red Rock, flanked by Sheriff Kilroy and Judge Briggs. Word had spread fast. By noon, half the town was watching from windows, porches, rooftops, whispering, muttering, watching a man they once feared walk with his head down for the first time in years. Daniel stood outside the general store, one arm around Sophie, the other resting on his hip. Eliza stood nearby, hands clasped tight in front of her. She wasn't trembling anymore. She was thinking. Clay spat in the dirt as they pushed him past the livery. This town's got no guts, he growled. One little farmer makes noise, and now y'all think you're heroes. Judge Briggs didn't even look at him. You threatened a child, he said. Doesn't take a hero to know that's wrong. Just takes a man with eyes. The crowd murmured. Some folks looked down. Others, folks who'd turned blind eyes for years, started to look up again. Then a voice cut through the street. Not loud, not shaking, just clear. Eliza, Daniel said softly, you don't have to. But she stepped forward anyway, out in front of everyone. And she said, I've got something to say. The crowd quieted. Even Clay turned, confused. Eliza looked around. This town watched me get sold like cattle, she said, steady now. Watch girls like me disappear through back doors. Everyone knew what Finch was doing. No one spoke. She looked straight at Finch, who stood pale behind the saloon window. You kept ledgers, she said. I know because I wrote them. Every girl sold, every debt faked, every deal made. Finch's face went white. Judge Briggs turned. You have those records? I can get them, Eliza said. They're under the false bottom of his office desk, right side drawer, tacked beneath the whiskey ledgers. Gasps rippled. People shifted, looked at Finch. Some glared. He tried to slip away. But Sheriff Kilroy was already moving. Stop right there. Clay Rimmer watched it unfold with his mouth half open. His plan, whatever it was, had crumbled like old dust. And now the town wasn't turning against Daniel, it was turning against him. Eliza took one last step forward. And this time, her voice cracked. Not from fear, from truth. Every man who paid to hurt someone, you weren't buying a woman, you were buying silence, and I'm done being silent. The crowd roared, not loud like a mob, but sharp, final. The sound of shame waking up inside good people who had stayed quiet for too long. Daniel stood by, stunned. He'd spent his life thinking men had to do the saving. But today, it was Eliza who saved them all. Later, after the records were collected, after Finch was taken into custody and Rimmer thrown into a cell, the judge asked Daniel what he thought should happen next. Daniel just looked at Eliza and said, I think she's earned the right to choose that for herself. Eliza didn't hesitate. I want to testify, she said, and then I want a life. The judge nodded. You'll have both. And for the first time since Red Rock was founded, the law actually felt like something real. Red Rock was never the same after that. The saloon was shut down. Brady Finch was sentenced to 5 years hard labor for trafficking, fraud, and falsifying court debt. Clay Rimmer sat in the jailhouse for a week before a federal marshal hauled him out in chains, his ranch seized, his men scattered to the wind. Nobody in town came to say goodbye, but the real change didn't come from the court. It came from the people. Folks who once watched in silence started talking. Mothers stopped walking their girls past the saloon. The preacher gave a sermon titled, What Happens When You Look Away Too Long. And up on the hill, past the fields of dry wheat and broken fences, the little farmhouse came back to life. Eliza didn't leave. Not after the trial. Not after the press stopped caring. She stayed. By choice. Because when everything else had broken, this was the first place that hadn't. She worked the fields beside Daniel, sewed Sophie's dresses, cooked real meals, not saloon scraps, and read stories to the girl every night by oil lamp. Daniel never asked her to stay, but he never asked her to leave either. Their lives simply wove together, like two broken ropes braided into something stronger. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Sophie asked a question. Papa, is Eliza my new mama? Daniel looked at Eliza. She smiled soft, shy, but real. And before he could answer, Sophie added, 'Cause she tucks me in better than you do. They both laughed. It wasn't the kind of laughter that fixes everything, but it was the kind that means you're healing. A year passed. Then one spring morning, under a cottonwood tree in full bloom, Daniel and Eliza stood in front of Reverend Brooks, holding hands. Sophie wore white and threw wildflowers into the breeze. It wasn't a big wedding, just neighbors, a judge, some chickens wandering too close. But it was good. It was enough. As the crowd dispersed and the sun stretched across the fields, Eliza pulled Daniel aside. Her voice barely rose above the wind. Why me? She asked. Daniel didn't speak right away. Then he touched her cheek and said, Because you didn't need saving, you needed someone to see you. She nodded, tears in her eyes. You're the first man who never wanted anything from me. Daniel smiled. That's not true. She tilted her head. I wanted you to feel safe and loved. That's all I ever wanted. And in that small patch of earth, surrounded by wheat and wind and memory, the girl who was once auctioned off for her father's debts became a woman no one could ever buy again. They built a life after that. Not perfect, but theirs. The farmhouse stayed warm. The land grew slowly. And every now and then, Daniel would catch Eliza standing on the porch, hand on her belly, watching Sophie run through the grass. And he'd remember that night in the saloon when he had $90, nothing to offer, and still stepped forward. No. Because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't cost you everything. Sometimes it gives you everything you never knew you needed.